Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh to all of you who are here. I appreciate your attendance. Um, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. So, as you can see, guys, and as I imagine you already saw the poster for the webinar, today's webinar is a brief discussion on the topic that you can see in front of you and on that poster on faith and reason and Islamic perspectives on philosophy. And also we're going to talk about an upcoming course that we have that delves into some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And yeah, we'll get to that. So in a nutshell, basically all I want to do in this brief session, and hopefully we can have it interactive, so you guys just feel free to, ask questions as we go along, and obviously I'll post some questions to you as well. But the basic overview of today's session is just to talk about, first of all, well, what do we mean by philosophy in the first place? If we're going to have any kind of understanding on how, say, Islam can relate to philosophy, well, we need to have just some idea as to what philosophy is, at least in brief. And then obviously the second part is looking at the relationship between Islam and philosophy. And I'm going to discuss some different ways of thinking about that. And then finally, as I said, I'll just sort of make brief mention of this upcoming course that's going to take place with me as the instructor through Balagh Academy. And then obviously, inshallah, we'll have time for any questions as well at the end. But just to reiterate, feel free to just ask questions as we go along. All right. So I hope that all makes sense. So yeah, part one, what is philosophy? What do we mean by philosophy in the first place? Now, before I sort of lay out what I think we should sort of define philosophy as, in at least in simple terms, let me hand it over to you guys. So what do you guys think philosophy is? Or when you hear the term philosophy, what do you think it means? Or what are people talking about or referring to when they use that term? And you don't need to tell me any special definition, just the first thoughts that come to your head. When you hear philosophy, what do you think about that term? What does it mean to you? What do you think it means? So just go ahead, guys, and just, type in the chat. Okay, cool stuff. Sure. Yeah, I agree with you for sure. The art of thinking. Okay. Interesting. Sharing someone's own thoughts, the meaning of things. Okay. All interesting stuff. Anybody else? Any other thoughts, guys? Studying the true essence of things. I like that. That's a good one. And we'll sort of touch on that on a moment. Deep thinking. Yeah, that seems to me to be relevant as well. All right. So we have a few interesting ideas here. Deep thinking, studying the true essence or meaning of things. Maybe studying the art of thinking, contemplating about certain fundamental things like morals and ethics, reading between the lines. Okay, all very good stuff. And I think the basic or simple definition of philosophy that I'm just going to lay out for you guys today kind of subsumes all of these ideas that you're getting at. So I think that we could just define philosophy, at least for the purposes of today's session, as something really simple, as just thinking very hard about something, right? So by philosophy, I just mean simply thinking hard about something. But what exactly does it mean to think hard about something? Well, I think it means at least three things. When we talk about thinking, in essence, we mean using reason or using our intellect and our rational faculties or capacities, right? So when we're thinking hard about something, it might be that, we do involve our senses and other faculties like our memory, our perception, our intuition, and so on. But primarily, I think we're using reason, right? When we're thinking about something deeply, or hard, we're really testing the limits of our reason, and we're drawing on our rational faculties to really think. Now, I also think when we say thinking hard about something, that is to say, like, as someone mentioned, I think, in the chat, we're trying to get to the essence of the thing that we're thinking about, right? We're not just thinking around the edges or on the surface of the matter. We're really trying to think hard and deeply. We're trying to get to the very heart or root or essence of the thing that we're thinking about, right? So if we're thinking hard, say, about anything, whether it could be like my phone, we might ask sort of fundamental questions about the phone, like, what exactly is this particular object that I'm holding? What, like, fundamentally is it made of? What is it for? What's the point of this? How did it even get here in the first place? Right? These are like fundamental questions that we could ask about this phone. And we could ask those kinds of questions about any matter. In general, it's possible, isn't it? And of course, when I'm posing those questions, I'm thinking hard. I'm using my reason to ask and pose these questions. But then hopefully we don't just leave the questions out there, right? We seek to answer these fundamental questions that we ask. So in posing these questions about my mobile phone, for instance, about what it's made of, about how it came here, about what it's for, we want to again rely on reason and our rational faculties to seek answers. And we might pose different answers or explanations to these questions, and then have a discussion about how good those answers are, how plausible or reasonable they are, right? Clearly, if I say that my mobile phone is made of bits of like plastic and metal, well, that seems a more reasonable answer to the question of what it's made of than say that it's made of candy floss, right? But we could even ask more fundamental questions than that, like what exactly is plastic made of, or metal or something, right? So in general, with philosophy, I want you guys to just have this idea that philosophy is thinking hard about something. So we're using reason, we're asking fundamental questions, and then we're seeking to answer those questions using reason as well. Now, there are less trivial things in mobile phones and more fundamental and important things than mobile phones. So just as we can ask fundamental questions about mobile phones, there are fundamental topics or issues that we can ask questions about. And hence, philosophy is divided up into different branches where different topics or subjects come to the forefront of our fundamental questioning, right? So there are many branches of philosophy. Well, you might say sub-branches of philosophy, but these are like the 6 main branches of philosophy. So as you can see at the top half of the diagram, there are 3: metaphysics, epistemology, and logic. This diagram I just sort of took from the internet. I suppose it would have been helpful to not have the descriptions underneath the terms, so I could just ask you guys what you think these terms mean. But it kind of defeats the point me asking it now, because there's already a description under them. But essentially, metaphysics studies the fundamental structure or nature of reality, right? So, we might ask, like, what are the fundamental constituents of whatever exists? So whatever exists in the universe, what exactly is it made out of? What's the nature of like time and change and essence and these kind of things? Why does anything exist at all? We know that things exist. Why do things exist in the first place? We could ask questions about the nature of ourselves as persons. What does it mean to be us? Like, what are we sort of made out of? What constitutes us, our identity? Is it our body? Is it our soul? Is it some sort of combination of the two, right? So those are fundamental questions about the stuff that exists, like the stuff that comprises the universe and why we have a universe and stuff like that in the first place. Just responding to a question here, could we also have a brief explanation how philosophy fits in Islam? Yeah, we're going to do that in the next part. So epistemology is the question of like how we know stuff. What does it mean to know stuff? What are the sources of knowledge? To what extent could we be justified, or are we being reasonable in believing in something? Right. So those are all epistemological questions. Then we have logic, right? The study of basically how we reason. So what's going to be key to philosophy, as we already mentioned on the previous slide, is asking fundamental questions and trying to answer them. And in answering fundamental questions, say about why the universe exists, well, philosophers will use reason to come up with arguments as a means of answering the question, why the universe exists. And what philosophers also want to do is assess whether those arguments are any good, right? Whether they're valid arguments or sound arguments. And so logic is the study of basically reasoning and arguments. Then if we look at the bottom half, we have ethics, aesthetics, political philosophy. Ethics, we're asking fundamental questions about what sort of constitutes the good and the bad. What's the nature of the good life? What does it mean to live a good life or meaningful life? What's right and wrong? Is there objective good and objective bad in the world, or is it merely a subjective preference or the products of one's cultural, social, environmental upbringing? Aesthetics was a study of art and beauty. And then we have political philosophy, which is the study of government, of governance, of authority, and things of that nature. So that's a very kind of brief overview of philosophy. So we had that philosophy is thinking hard about something. And then what philosophers are going to do is they're going to think hard about these stuff like metaphysics, epistemology, logic, ethics, aesthetics, and political philosophy, and then ask fundamental questions in those areas. Like, how do we know stuff? Can we know anything at all? And if so, what are the means by which we know? What are the stuff that exists in the universe? What exactly is it made out of? Is there really objective good and bad in the world? Does beauty exist? What is a legitimate form of authority or government? And what constitutes a valid argument? So these are all fundamental questions that we think hard about and we try to answer, right? So I hope that just gives you a sense of roughly what I take philosophy to mean. Feel free, guys, at this point to ask any questions as well. Yeah, am I really speaking to you, or is it some form of artificial intelligence that's merely mimicking me in some form of capacity? That's an interesting philosophical question there, right? So do we have any questions, guys, or any confusions at this point? Anything that you'd want me to clarify? I can't enlarge the screen with the chat. Is it just me? I don't know about that. Right. Yeah. You can't enlarge the screen. I don't know about that. I'm going to leave that to the host. If there's some kind of tech issue about enlarging the screen, yeah, please address that, guys, or the host. Okay, so as I said, if you have any questions, I mean, if you don't have to ask them now, but if there's anything you want me to clarify about what I just said, please feel free. All right, so I take what I just said then as like a brief overview of what I mean by philosophy. And now I want to dive into what I think's like the meat or the heart of today's session, probably why you guys have tuned in or come or attended in the first place. Just sort of right off the bat, have you guys heard some stuff about like Islam and philosophy in the past? Have you read anything or heard anything about the relationship or connection between Islam and philosophy, whether it's just that, you know, Islam has its own inherent philosophy, or whether it's the case that philosophy and Islam are completely antithetical or incompatible. What are the sort of connections or disconnections that you might have heard about Islam and philosophy? Yeah, I think basically the issue, guys, just about the tech issue. I think it might be that I've been somehow pinned on the screen so that I'm becoming bigger than the PowerPoint. I think they want the PowerPoint to be bigger than my face, which is understandable. Um, okay, Brandy, I remember that. Pondering. Okay, so you have some kind asking intuitive questions. Okay, what I'm really getting at though, guys, is have you sort of heard anything about the connection between Islam and philosophy? Not like what philosophy is, but anything to do with Islam and philosophy. So, like I said, it could be that Islam has its own kind of philosophy. Islam has a history and rich history of doing philosophy in some way. Philosophy was part of Islamic civilization. Or is there some issue like, okay, you've probably heard philosophy is haram. Yeah, I've heard that too. Or it involves too much fitna. Um, Philosophy in Islam is about seeking knowledge, um, asking of existential questions. Yeah, all right. Not really, not heard of the subject of Islam philosophy directly. When encountered with Greek philosophy, a section of Islamic scholars who studied it and proving Islam's truth using philosophy. Interesting. So there's this idea that in the history of philosophy, somehow the Islamic world and Greek philosophy become interconnected, and Muslims engage in philosophy and try to prove Islam using philosophical tools. Interesting, right? So what I want to do with you guys is just think about a few things. So here in on this first slide, I have 3 slides in this section. On this first slide, I want you to think about some of these Quranic verses or verses that we have in the Quran, which seem to encourage and promote and advocate the use of reason, and might even chastise those who don't use reason, right? And then on the next slide, I'm going to look at some historical issues, and then finally something a bit more contemporary to think about. So here are just a bunch of verses or ayats from the Quran. Now, I could have honestly, you know, the whole PowerPoint just could have consisted of verses that are relevant to this topic. So these are just sort of randomly plucked out. Don't think that this is an exhaustive list or anything like that. So we see this first verse, have they not contemplated the realm of the heavens and the earth and all that God created, and that the end of their time might be near? What other revelation will they believe if they do not believe in this? Right. So in this verse, we have the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, asking the question, posing the question in rhetorical terms about the contemplation of the heavens and the earth. In other words, God's creation, right? So God has created the world, and as we know from a Quranic paradigm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set up ayat or signs, ayatul afaq, signs in the horizon, so ayatul anfus, signs within ourselves, right? Which are a means by which we can understand and know things about God, right? And so in this verse, like the contemplation of nature, of the world at large is seemingly encouraged, isn't it? In the second verse we have here, no soul can believe except by God's will, and he brings disgrace on those who do not use their reason. So this verse seems to be chastising those who do not use their reason, that those who fail to use reason appropriately will be led astray, or they will not find the truth. The Quran seems to have this understanding that when reason and intellect is used appropriately or properly, one will discover al-haq, Allah, right? The ultimate truth, right? We have another verse here. In this way, God makes his signs clear to you so that you might use reason. لعلكم تعقلون, right? That God created the world and set up signs for us to ponder and contemplate, and gave us intellect so that we might use reason and make the connection between the nature of the world and the fact that he is the creator and sustainer of it. Do they not observe the camels, how they were created in the sky, how it's been raised up? So again, the Quran encouraging us to think, to look, to observe nature, the nature of the world, and to form a conclusion, which, if we use reason properly, the Quran suggesting we will follow it through to the conclusion that Allah exists, created and sustained everything. Now, clearly, the way that we kind of defined philosophy a moment ago, thinking hard about something and asking fundamental questions about it, if philosophy is just understood in those terms, then it doesn't look like there is, any, at least prima facie, issue, right? When you look at these verses, because it seems as if, right, philosophy is using reason and thinking hard about stuff, particularly like could be metaphysics, the nature of the universe, why the universe exists, whether it has a creator or something. And the Quran, at the same time, is encouraging us to think hard and to think deeply and to use reason in sort of pondering those philosophical questions, which will ultimately lead us to him when we use reason properly. So at least at face value and at least in defining philosophy in the way that I have, it looks like there's no real issue. But philosophy has, taken on different meanings, different appropriations or understandings throughout the history of philosophy, and particularly within an Islamic milieu or an Islamic context. And so I want to just consider, for instance, why philosophy might be seen as controversial or problematic or really, really important in different ways within the history of the Islamic tradition. And again, this topic needs not just a lecture, a whole sort of course in itself. So I don't really have that much time to go through all of the depth and detail that's required here, but at least let me give you sort of a sense of some different perspectives. And I could have picked out other different figures and stuff like that. Just a quick caveat, I'm trying to keep it away from a discussion about like fiqh issues, right? So that's partly why, for example, I have two philosophers here, although Ibn Qudama is a faqih. But just anyway, be that as it may. So yeah, we could well do that, Shoaib, inshallah. So the first view that I want to think about for a moment is the view that Ibn Rushd lays out in what's called his decisive treatise. So Ibn Rushd, or Averroes or Averroes, depending on how you pronounce the Latin version of his name, is a sort of well-known medieval Andalusian philosopher. And Ibn Rushd thought that philosophy was something very important. In fact, he thought philosophy was not just really important, but he actually thought it was obligatory, right? He thought it was essentially wajib, even from a Shari'i point of view, which is a kind of really radical view in this, given the fact that many of us have heard that philosophy might even be haram, let alone wajib. It's the complete sort of opposite end of the spectrum or scale. So is there any reason why you think Ibn Rushd might have thought philosophy is obligatory? And I'll try to explain briefly why he thought this. But why do you guys think that Ibn Rushd, might have thought philosophy is obligatory? Not just really important, but actually something we have to engage in, something we must do, at least as a community. Not that everybody has to do it, but at least that some of us within the community have to engage in philosophy. What might Ibn Rushd be getting at when he says this? Any ideas, guys? Again, just throw the very first thoughts that come to your head. It doesn't have to be anything precisely formulated. Okay, probably because the Quran charges us to use our reason. Okay, I like it. That makes sense. And in fact, that is part of Ibn Rushd's thinking. So yeah, well done there, Abbas. Any other thoughts? Guys, on why someone like Ibn Rushd might have thought it's really important or obligatory even? Someone says, I don't think it's haram because Imam al-Ghazali has talked about it. Okay, fair enough. It is the means towards knowing Allah. I wonder if Ibn Rushd thinks it, I mean, maybe Ibn Rushd thought it was the means. Yeah, we'll get to that. I wonder whether we agree with that or whether it's just a particular mean. To refute arguments of skeptics, Allah asks us to ponder, reflect, look, etc. I think he saw Muslims affected by philosophy, so he wanted Muslims to counterattack it. All right. Very interesting ideas there, guys. So, first of all, Ibn Rushd, he has a particular definition of philosophy, right? So, Ibn Rushd thinks that philosophy is essentially the study of like the nature of what exists. And this is the caveat he adds, it's the study of the nature of what exists and as a means to understand how it has been created or how it's been made by its creator. So Ibn Rushd sets up his definition of philosophy in a way that has kind of an inbuilt religious philosophical view, right, that a creator exists. So that's his definition of philosophy. And then he says, and look at the Quran, right? And he points to some of the verses on this previous slide. He says, look at the Quran. The Quran encourages to study the nature of things that exist as a means to understanding how they're made by their creator and so on. Therefore, philosophy is obligatory, right? That's the basic syllogistic reasoning that he sets up. Now, but it's slightly more than that as well, because what Ibn Rushd thinks is that philosophy is not just thinking hard about something, as I've put it, but philosophy is, well, it involves a particular kind of reasoning, like which is called demonstrative reasoning. So he thinks that philosophy involves asking questions and finding out deductive, demonstrative proofs as answers to those questions, right? And so he says that other disciplines like kalam or theology, say, they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily have to involve demonstrative reasoning, but philosophy does. And demonstrative reasoning is a more perfect form of reasoning. And the Quran encourages to think in the best manner or in the most wise manner. And so the Quran is advocating philosophy over, like, say, theology. Now, or kalam. So, for instance, some of you guys, like in the chat, said, well, maybe Ibn Rushd thought that philosophy is obligatory because, he thought that we need to refute or rebut, like, objections to Islam. And I think Ibn Rushd would say, well, no, that's kalam, right? Kalam is an apologetic discipline which tries to rebut objections to Islam. But philosophy is not about that. Philosophy is just about understanding the true nature of things. And of course, dealing with any objections, but not for the sake of defending anything, but for the sake of understanding. Now, we might not agree with Ibn Rushd here because, first of all, his definition of philosophy is slightly problematic. He sets it up in such a way as to sort of hand him his conclusion because he already involves like a controversial religious premise in a way, which I guess most people wouldn't define philosophy in the way Ibn Rushd did today. So I'm not quite sure he's wholly convincing. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have someone like Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah. And Ibn Qudama, he has a famous book, which is the shorthand title is Tahrim al-Nadhar. And Tahrim al-Nadhar basically means like the censure of engaging in rational speculative theology or something like that, right? So Ibn Qudama, he thinks that this is a problem, right? If we engage in rational speculative reasoning, as is encouraged by philosophers or some theologians within the Islamic tradition, this is likely to lead us away from the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, right? And so I think those who want to say like philosophy is bad or it's haram or it should be guarded against probably come out of the same line of thinking or tradition as someone like Ibn Qudama and maybe his predecessors like Ahmad ibn Hanbal and some of the early Hanbali scholars. They were sort of wary that when we use reason and we put the Quran and the Sunnah under the microscope and we look at it through reason, because we're fallible and flawed, we might make mistakes. We might end up coming up with conclusions that contradict what Allah told us and what the Prophet told us. And we shouldn't do that, right? We should follow whatever Allah told us about himself and the nature of the world and also what the Prophet revealed, or what was revealed to us through the Prophet. So Ibn Qudama, and his ilk are worried that philosophy might lead people away from religious faith. So that's the complete opposite view of Ibn Rushd. Now, another view within the Islamic tradition is that of Al-Kindi. As you can see just from the dates, Al-Kindi is quite an early thinker within the Islamic tradition. In fact, he's considered to be the first Islamic philosopher. And he's known as the philosopher of the Arabs. But Al-Kindi, he has this idea that whether you like philosophy or whether you don't like philosophy, whether you think it's obligatory, whether you think it's reprehensible, it's unavoidable. And his basic thought is that, look, either you say that we must do philosophy or we shouldn't do philosophy. If we must do philosophy, then we must do philosophy. And if you say we shouldn't do philosophy, then you need to give us some kind of argument or reason why we shouldn't do philosophy. But then in giving us an argument or reason why we shouldn't do philosophy, you're doing philosophy, right? So there's no way out. It's a trap. So the argument is that if you try to argue against doing philosophy, it's self-defeating because you're already doing philosophy. So that's Al-Kindi's view. Now, this view might not be that convincing because someone like Ibn Qudama could easily turn around and say, well, no, we don't need a philosophical argument to say we shouldn't do philosophy. We can just pluck it from the Quran or from, well, not exactly, but some interpretation of a Quranic verse. In other words, either from the Quran or Sunnah. But I will get to that in a moment because I'm not entirely sure that that's a wholly adequate response. So just to summarize then, we have these three different views within the tradition. We have philosophy is obligatory. We've got to do it. Philosophy is a must. No, we cannot do it. And philosophy, well, whatever you think, it's unavoidable. So just before I turn to the next slide, guys, and I think about particularly this view that philosophy is reprehensible as well as unavoidable. What do you guys think about these three different perspectives? Where do you guys currently line up? Would you be more on the side of Ibn Rushd, Ibn Qudama, Al-Kindi? Now, that doesn't, you don't have to be like wholly with any of them. Like you can love Ibn Qudama and not agree with him on this, or you can hate Ibn Rushd but agree with him on this, or Al-Kindi, or whatever the case may be. So whose side are you on, guys? Why would you agree with one or the other? What do you guys think? Who's sort of more in the right at the moment? I'm just also scrolling up, just looking at some of the previous things that you guys have been saying. The Quran always challenges that if you bring a sentence to challenge the ayah, try it, ponder to understand that Allah is true, right? Yeah, so this idea of the Quran like challenging us, or at least challenging the disbelievers in this context, but more generally encouraging and challenging us, I think is a relevant point that we'll also return to on the next slide. Would it be about the self-existence and finding your true karma? I don't know what you mean by karma in this context. So we have a couple of Kindis, Al-Kindi. We have an Ibn Rushd. I'd be curious to know why, but I think Al-Kindi seems to be winning. Al-Kindi seems to be winning. Now, as I said, I think that his argument, as it stands, could be avoided in the sense that, you know, Ibn Qudama and those types could just say, well, no, we can reject philosophy, but we don't have to do philosophy to reject it. But I think in a moment, we'll see how I think even that response is not completely adequate. Okay, so this is the last slide, guys, before I turn to talking about an upcoming course where we think about some of these ideas and more. The late contemporary Muslim philosopher Shabir Akhtar, Allah yarham, he recently passed away. Now, he wrote an interesting article, or it's a book chapter, which is entitled The Possibility of an Islamic Philosophy. And I think his chapter is interesting for us to think about. So essentially what Shabir Akhtar does in the chapter is he starts off by just laying out essentially a bunch of objections to philosophy from an Islamic perspective. So he essentially just rehearses some objections that he thinks that you'll find either in the historic tradition or just in the contemporary Muslim community when the issue of philosophy comes up, or the issue of engaging in philosophy specifically as a Muslim or from an Islamic perspective. It's not a book, it's a book chapter. The title is The Possibility of an Islamic Philosophy. Now, so let's just think about some of these objections for a moment, right? So the first objection that Shabir Akhtar raises is the idea that, look, Muslims should not be in the position to judge Allah's book, right? They should not be in the position to put it under the microscope and judge it, because Allah is the creator and sustainer and the Lord of the universe, and what he tells us is so, and we should just submit to it, right? Okay? You know, the Islam is submission. We submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. We don't judge it. We follow it, and so on. Now, to some extent, of course, we can agree with that. But what Shabir Akhtar says about this first objection is that, you know, as human beings, when a particular book is revealed to us, like the Quran, we have to be in some kind of position to decide whether it is the true book or it's not a true book from God. We have various other traditions that claim to have a book from God, right? And we're in no position other than having to just make up our minds as to whether this is God's book or not. Now, the Quran itself encourages us to reflect and to challenge the book. If we'd have found any contradictions in it, then it would have been from other than God. If we think about its preservation, if we think about the fact that it couldn't be imitated, and it encourages the challenge, right? So even the Quran itself seems to be encouraging us to use reason to figure out and ultimately find the truth that the Quran is from God, right? So that the first objection just doesn't seem to hold. Again, if we're thinking about philosophy as thinking hard about something and using reason and asking fundamental questions like, is this book the book of God? Is the Quran Allah's book? Right? Well, there seems to be no prima facie issue here, at least as far as this first objection goes. What about the second one? Muslim thinkers cannot obey their intellect over God's word. So related to this first objection, there's this idea that if we, again, sort of put the Quran under a metaphorical microscope and we test it using reason, in that case, whatever conclusion we come up with, it seems as if we're somehow obeying. We might be obeying or following reason as opposed to following or just submitting to God's word. But again, it seems like the response to the first objection is adequate here as well, that ultimately, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us and gave us reason, right? He gave us an intellect. He gave us the ability to think, and he's encouraging us to think. And ultimately, that's all we can do as humans, right? That's all we can do. So we approach Allah's book and, we're sincere. We find that it's his word. And of course, we submit to it. If we find there's another book, again, we have to use the same tools, right? We have to use reason in either case, in any scenario, right? So it's not a matter of obeying the intellect. We have no other choice but to use our intellect that God himself has given us, which is the means by which we know his book is true. The third objection that Shabir Akhtar entertains is a little bit, I suppose, the third and fourth are more interesting. So the third is that Muslim thinkers who engage in philosophy lack faith. Now, I would say the fourth is more interesting, but this is the idea that, look, the reason why people engage in philosophy, like philosophical arguments for the existence of God and reflection on whether the Quran exists, whether the Quran is true and whether Allah exists, and so on, it's just because they lack faith, right? They have weak iman or something like that. Now, it might be the case that a particular individual has weak iman who's doing that, but that's not necessary, right? Like, it's not necessary that someone who engages in deeper rational reflection on Allah and his book is thereby showing signs of weak faith, especially when the Quran itself encourages us to think hard and ponder the world and himself and the Quran, right? So that just doesn't seem plausible again. Now, the fourth objection, I would say would be the strongest here. So he considers the objection that Muslim thinkers who engage in philosophy must suspend their faith. In other words, when you go into the philosophy classroom or you do philosophy, at least for that moment, you should suspend your sort of previously held commitments, right? Because if you want to think clearly and objectively without any cognitive bias, then you should just sort of suspend judgment, right? And suspend your religious commitments and faith. Now, there's a couple of things here. So Shabir Akhtar says, well, okay, first of all, if that's the case, it's certainly not necessarily the case that the person lacks faith. So he describes that person as having an intermittent faith, like just during that period, they suspend their faith. Now, Shabir Akhtar basically says that from time to time, we might have to think clearly and objectively. We might have to, and these are his terms, we might have to take our religious cloak off for the moment, even if only just to mend the cloak for a kind of stronger religious service when we put it back on, right? So it's not that we're throwing it away, but almost like we're servicing the cloak and then we're putting it back on. So that's his kind of metaphor And that might be, a reasonable response. Others, though, might say that actually you can engage in philosophy without suspending your faith, right? You can go into the philosophy classroom with your previously held commitments, with your prior commitments and beliefs, but only that when you assess arguments and stuff, you do it fairly and objectively, but not that you have to leave your cloak or your beliefs at the door when you enter the classroom, right? So we might respond to this by saying, no, actually, Muslims who engage in philosophy don't need to suspend their faith, or that it's okay to do so for the moment, only to kind of deepen and enrich in our faith once we leave the classroom, if you like, again, metaphorically. So these are just some interesting thoughts. Now, when we think about, say, like a view that Ibn Qudama's view, or Ahmed ibn Hanbal and those of their ilk, that basically say, it's haram philosophy and we should avoid it and we shouldn't engage in it and so on. And I was saying Al-Kindi's argument is that it's unavoidable, but they could say, well, look, no, we're saying you shouldn't do philosophy, not on philosophical grounds, but on, say, religious grounds, on the basis of religious text. And so they would probably object in one of the following manners that we've just seen. Ibn Qudama would do so, some probably. One response would be that actually there's no sort of explicit verse or hadith that talks about like not doing philosophy, right? And so even the hermeneutical practice and interpretation that Muslim jurists undergo to get to the conclusion that we shouldn't engage in philosophy, especially when we define it in this term of just thinking hard about something, it seems as though those are going to involve sufficient number of kind of philosophical moves that it would still count as philosophy, right? So I just wanted to say that as well. Finally, so having considered some objections to an Islamic philosophy or doing philosophy as Muslims, Shabir Akhtar just lays out three presuppositions of a philosophy of Islam. So he says, number one, religious beliefs should be treated like other beliefs in the sense that we have, say, scientific beliefs, we have moral beliefs, we have political beliefs, we have historical beliefs, beliefs in science about things that happened in the past in history, beliefs about what good governance looks like in politics, beliefs about what's right and wrong in moral philosophy or ethics. And he said religious beliefs should be treated in the same way, in the sense that whether it's rational or not, or reasonable or not to believe any of these beliefs, we should treat them in a similar manner. So, for example, if the principle is that you should only believe something if you have good evidence, well, that should apply to religious belief just as it applies to scientific belief. Okay? The second thing is that religious belief, or iman, billah, is a human conviction. Although, we agree that getting to the position of iman will be certainly in part due to Allah's hidayah and guidance. It is ultimately a human conviction. Like, these are the tools that God has given us. He's given us reason and we have to use it and we're relying on it. And our iman is in part just a product of that human-based conviction using reason, which is in that, so it's unavoidable in that sense. And finally, belief in God does not preclude rational thinking about him. Just because you believe in God and you have faith in Allah and even his revelation, it doesn't mean that we can't think rationally and reflectively and deeply about those matters. Okay? So I hope this gives you some kind of food for thought about the role of philosophy within Islam and how it might be appropriated and used. I haven't come here to tell you my specific thoughts and conclusions, but only just to give you some, as I say, food for thought. All right. So I will come to questions in a moment, guys. I have a kind of one last thing that I want to do with you. Let me just also pull up something. My laptop's a bit slow at the moment. Okay, so basically, guys, look, if this has interested you And if you're interested in exploring these topics about, say, belief in God, arguments for God's existence, the nature of religious belief, religious experience, meaning in the universe, life after death, why there's a universe in the first place, the nature of good and bad, and whether we can ground it in the absence of God or not, then I encourage you guys basically to consider signing up to this upcoming course that we have here set up by Balagh Academy, which I'll be instructing. So the course is an introduction to philosophy of religion, right? So what does that mean? Well, it means thinking hard about religious questions or questions within religion, right? As I said, the nature of God, its existence, arguments for God, miracles, whether they happen, how we can know they happen, whether it's rational to believe in God or Islam or religion, the nature of life after death, religious experience, and more. So the course consists of 12 lectures, which are going to be basically about some of these topics that I've just mentioned, and hopefully in an accessible, interactive, and engaging way. And what I want to do with this course, and I think this is one of the unique features that it'll have relative to some other traditional courses in philosophy of religion, is that we'll involve both the contemporary Western philosophers of religion, but also Islamic thinkers and figures as well, and try to think about it from the perspective of figures that belong to our tradition and come from our perspective more. Okay, so that's basically the course. Now, you can just, I think, if you can see this screen, yeah, you can go to the Balagh Academy website, okay, and you can find the course and all the details about it, and you can enroll and sign up there. So I hope today's session was interesting, and I turn it over to you guys for any questions about the course and any questions about the two of the things that we talked about today, namely what philosophy is and the relationship between Islam and philosophy. All right, so let me just see. We have some questions coming in. I think we have some coming in already. I'll read them out. The concept of contemplation is so fundamental to our deen, alhamdulillah. It seems that the concept of philosophy has been distorted over time to become something bad. Yeah, I think this is important. How we understand and define philosophy. Within the historic tradition, philosophy, certainly at the time of like Al-Kindi, Ibn Rushd, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and so on, was basically synonymous with a particular interpretation of Aristotelian and like Platonic philosophy, which, you know, is not necessarily the way that philosophy is understood today. And if we just think about philosophy as thinking hard about something and asking fundamental questions, finding answers, as I think is a reasonable way to think about today, and we can see how it's far less problematic than it might have been in the past. It truly brings closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our deen without taking time to do muraqabah can be quite hollow. Alhamdulillah. Sorry, just my opinion. Yeah, I agree. I'm just going down. How will it be different to atheism in Islam? So, good question. It will primarily involve topics that, although they have some bearing within Islam, just given that Islam is a religion and we're asking fundamental questions that are of a religious import, we're not focusing on Islam specifically, right? So if I just share my screen again for the moment. So the first session is about the thinking tools that we need to do philosophy of religion. Then we'll ask questions about the nature of God, and then questions about philosophy and religious belief, whether religious belief can be rational, whether it needs evidence, what counts as evidence, stuff like that. Then we'll look at specific arguments for the existence of God, drawing on the Western and the Islamic traditions. Then we'll look at religious experience, the nature of religious experience, any problems with relying on religious experience as evidence, and whether it could be evidence. Then we'll look at issues that people have with belief in God, like the problem of evil, divine hiddenness, miracles, religious language, God and morality, and then life after death. Okay. So that's the full rundown there. Okay, just turning to the chat again. The computer's just been a bit slow. We have limits in philosophy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond our mind, capacity, and beyond everything in the universe, above and beyond. We cannot contemplate. The ghaib is something we have to believe. So I think we all can agree that if we're aiming to fully comprehend and fully understand the nature of Allah and even the nature of the universe, we're probably not going to get there, right? Because we have limited capacity. But that doesn't mean we can't go as far as that limited capacity in thinking and reasoning, right? Allah asked us to use our reason and to think for a reason that He knew with the limited capacity He gave us, He still enabled us to know basic truths about His existence, about what's right and wrong, about the fact that, you know, lots of things exist around me and stuff like that. So we've been given reason, we have to use it to its limits. And I think by it, we can all agree we can know stuff. Like, we all agree that 1 add 1 is 2, right? We think that's a really trivial thing. But it's actually quite a profound thing that we could even know basic stuff like that, because 1 add 1 is being 2. It looks like it's a necessary thing that has to always be the case. And if that's right, then it applies whatever the universe might be, right? So we can know sometimes quite profound truths. And we're not necessarily in the game of trying to comprehend everything exactly as it is, but we can strive and we can try to understand things the best as we can, given what Allah has enabled us to do. And the ghaib is not just something we have to believe if we have a good argument for thinking God exists, right? If we have a good argument for thinking God exists, well, we can know that God exists without seeing Him, right? If we have, you know, a good argument for thinking God exists and God is good, we might have reason to thinking that such a perfectly good God would create a Jannah and stuff like that. So there might be things that we can know that we can't see, but not necessarily in all its depth and detail. Hence, Allah sent us the Wahy, the Quran, to explain these things. Is there any textbook we will be working on throughout the course? Yeah. So we'll primarily be relying on, or not relying on, but like dipping into, at least from my side, Brian Davies' book. Brian Davies, it's an introduction to philosophy of religion, the 4th edition of that book. All right, just a few more questions then, guys, and I'll let you go because it is now 3 o'clock. Okay, I don't think we have questions there. All right, guys, so if there's no more questions, we can just sort of wrap it up. If you're still not sure whether you want to sign up for the course, all I can do is encourage you to go on the website to check it out, to look at the modules that we're going to go through. I hope today gives you a bit of a taste of the kind of, you know, interactive and engaging nature of the course. And yeah, I really hope to see you there, because the more participants and attendees we have, the more interesting it'll become, you know, for me as well as for everybody in attendance. Okay, guys, wa iyaakum. Barakallahu feekum, guys. Take care. And yeah, I hope to see you soon, inshallah. All right, guys, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.